All right, ready to dive into some seriously fascinating stuff today. We've got the Mahayana Yoga, Vajratta, Sagara, Manjusri, Sahasrapatra, Mahasasanaraja Sutra.
Wow, that's quite the title.
Yeah, I'm already feeling smarter just trying to say it.
Right. It is a mouthful, but it basically translates to the Mahayana Yoga Vajratta Sagara Manjusri Sutra of the Thousand-Armed and Thousand-Bold Great King of Teachings.
Okay, so the title itself is giving us a sense of grandeur, but what really caught my eye was the Thousand-Armed Manjushri.
Ah, yes, the imagery is definitely striking.
I mean, 1,000 arms, each holding a bowl. Come on, that's got to symbolize something pretty profound.
It does, and that's what makes this deep dive so exciting. We're not just looking at cool imagery, we're using it as a gateway to explore some core Buddhist teachings.
Okay, I like that. So before we get lost in the symbolisms, can you give us a little context? Who is Manjushri and why is he so important in Buddhism?
So Manjushri is the bodhisattva of wisdom, often depicted as a young prince embodying youthful wisdom and the power of the awakened mind.
A prince.
And he's often shown with a flaming sword that cuts through ignorance.
So he's like the ultimate symbol of clarity and insight.
Exactly. Think of him as the sharpest tool in the Buddhist shed.
Okay, I like that analogy. So he's this embodiment of wisdom, and this sutra takes that wisdom and multiplies it 1,000-fold. Literally.
Right. It's not just telling us that he's wise, it's showing us how he embodies that wisdom and how we can cultivate it within ourselves.
All right, so let's unpack that 1,000-armed imagery. 1,000 arms, each holding a bowl. What's the message there?
Well, the 1,000 arms represent Manjushri's ability to extend his wisdom and compassion in countless ways.
Countless ways.
Yeah, to meet the needs of all beings. Each bowl symbolizes the abundance of wisdom and compassion he offers. It's like saying, look, there's enough wisdom and compassion for everyone.
Wow, that's a message we could all use a little more of these days, right?
Absolutely. And that's what makes this sutra so relevant. It's not just about admiring a cool bodhisattva. It's about recognizing that potential within ourselves.
Okay, I'm starting to see where we're going with this. So the sutra is saying that we all have this inner Manjushri, this capacity for immense wisdom and compassion.
Right. And it's not just about potential. It's about actualizing that potential.
But how? I mean, 1,000 arms is a pretty tall order.
Well, the sutra doesn't expect us to sprout extra limbs.
That's a relief.
But it does offer specific instructions on how to cultivate wisdom and compassion through various practices.
Okay, so it's not just a bunch of abstract ideas. It actually gives us a roadmap.
Exactly. Think of it as a guidebook for cultivating the qualities of an awakened mind.
I like that analogy. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of those practices, can you tell me a bit more about this idea of Manjushri as a guide? The sutra mentions how even highly realized bodhisattvas, like the 5 wisdom kings, were once guided by him. Now, I'm not sure I'm familiar with these wisdom kings.
Oh, they're some of the heavy hitters in the Buddhist pantheon. Vairocana, Akshobhya, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, and Amoghasiddhi.
Okay, those names are ringing a bell. Maybe you can refresh my memory.
Absolutely. Each one represents a different aspect of enlightened wisdom. And the sutra specifically mentions how they were all guided by Manjushri at some point on their path.
Wow, so even these super enlightened beings, they didn't just magically get there on their own. They had a mentor, someone like Manjushri, to help them along the way.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway for us. It highlights the importance of finding good teachers, mentors, or sources of inspiration on our own paths.
Okay, so it's not about going it alone.
Not at all. We all need support and guidance, especially on a path as challenging as the path to awakening. But it also reminds us that even the most advanced beings were once beginners, just like us.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. I'm not sure I'm ready to be a wisdom king just yet.
And that's perfectly fine. The point is that we're all on a journey, and it's a journey we don't have to take alone.
So if Manjushri is this incredible guide, even for these wisdom kings, what about US? Does the sutra give us any guidance on how WE can find good teachers or mentors in our own WN lives?
That's a great question. The sutra itself doesn't offer a step-by-step guide on finding a teacher in the conventional sense.
So no wisdom king dating app?
Not quite. But what it does offer is something even more profound. It encourages us to cultivate the qualities of discernment and wisdom within ourselves.
So instead of telling us where to look, it's teaching us how to see.
Exactly. The sutra suggests that by developing our own inner wisdom, we become better equipped to recognize genuine guidance when we encounter it.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like saying you don't need someone to hold your hand every step of the way if you learn to trust your own inner compass.
That's a great way to put it. And the sutra offers specific practices to help us develop that inner compass, which we can explore in more detail later. But I'm curious, what stands out to you most about this idea of Manjushri as a guide, even for these highly realized bodhisattvas?
What stands out to me? I think it's the sense of interconnectedness it highlights. Even these enlightened beings, they weren't isolated individuals striving for enlightenment in a vacuum. They were part of a lineage, a tradition, a community of practice.
I see what you mean. It emphasizes that we're all connected, that we can learn from and support each other on the path.
Right, and Manjushri represents that interconnectedness, that passing of wisdom from one generation to the next.
And it's not just about receiving wisdom, it's about sharing it, passing it on to others.
So the path of wisdom is not a solitary pursuit, it's a collective one.
Exactly. We don't just cultivate wisdom for ourselves, we do it for the benefit of all beings.
Okay, I like where this is going. It's not about escaping the world and meditating on a mountaintop. It's about bringing that wisdom and compassion back into the world, sharing it with others.
And I think that's where the image of the Thousand Arms becomes really powerful. It's a visual reminder that enlightenment is not just about personal liberation. It's about extending our wisdom and compassion outwards, offering them to everyone we encounter.
All right, so we've talked about Manjushri as this ultimate guide, this embodiment of wisdom. We've also talked about how the sutra encourages us to cultivate that wisdom within ourselves. But let's get back to the how. You mentioned that the sutra offers specific practices, things like visualization and mantra recitation. Can you give us a little taste of what those practices might involve?
Sure. The sutra goes into great detail describing Manjushri's appearance, inviting us to visualize him with all his adornments.
All those adornments.
Yes, each one symbolizing a different aspect of wisdom or compassion.
Okay, so it's not just picturing a generic figure. It's about really diving into this intricate image.
It is. Think of it as a guided meditation, but with 1,000 points of focus.
1,000 points of focus. That sounds intense.
It can be, but it's also incredibly rich and rewarding. Each detail, from his crown to his sword to the objects he holds in each hand, offers a different insight.
Okay, so we're talking about a really vivid, almost psychedelic experience.
You could say that. It's about engaging the imagination, using it as a tool for cultivating wisdom.
I'm intrigued, but I have to admit, it also sounds a bit overwhelming. How does the average person even begin to wrap their mind around all that symbolism?
That's where the practice of mantra recitation comes in. The sutra gives us specific mantras associated with Manjushri.
Mantras, like chanting.
Exactly. Think of them as sound vibrations that help us connect with his energy and qualities.
Okay, but how does chanting a mantra actually help with all this visualization stuff?
Think of a mantra as a sonic key. It unlocks a particular state of mind. By chanting Manjushri's mantra, we're invoking his wisdom and clarity.
So it's like creating a mental space where it's easier to connect with the visualization.
Exactly. It's about using sound to amplify the power of the visualization.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about passively staring at an image in your mind. It's about engaging multiple senses to really immerse yourself in the practice.
Right. It's about creating a multi-sensory experience that deepens our connection to Manjushri's wisdom and compassion.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, literally. But I'm curious, does the sutra actually explain what these mantras mean, or is it more about the vibrational quality of the sound itself?
It's both, actually. The sutra offers interpretations of the syllables within the mantra.
So it's not just gibberish.
Oh, no, not at all. Each syllable is packed with meaning. It's like a code that, when deciphered, reveals deeper layers of Manjushri's qualities.
Okay, so it's a bit like music. You can appreciate a song without knowing the lyrics, but the lyrics can add another layer of depth to the experience.
That's a great analogy. It's about engaging both the head and the heart.
Okay, so we've got visualization and mantra recitation as key practices. But before we get too caught up in the specifics, I think it's important to remember the story of King Nitra, which the sutra highlights. He was the king who established a 100-day practice of the sutra's teachings throughout his kingdom, right?
That's right. And I think this story is crucial because it reminds us that these teachings aren't just meant for individual practitioners. They have the potential to transform entire communities.
So it's not just about personal enlightenment. It's about creating a more enlightened society.
Exactly. And I think King Nitra's actions offer a really inspiring example of how that can happen.
But why 100 days specifically? Is there something magical about that number?
In many Buddhist traditions, 100 days is seen as a significant period for intensive practice.
Intensive.
Yeah, a time to really immerse oneself in the teachings and see their transformative effects.
So King Mitra was basically saying, hey, if an entire kingdom can dedicate itself to these practices for 100 days, imagine the positive impact it could have.
Precisely. And I think that's a really important message for us today. We don't have to wait for some grand societal shift to happen before we start putting these teachings into practice.
Okay, so we can start small, even with just ourselves, and let the positive effects ripple outwards.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe we can inspire others to join us along the way.
So we've talked about Manjushri as a guide. We've touched on some of the specific practices outlined in the sutra. And we've even gotten a glimpse of how these teachings can play out on a larger scale. But I have to admit, all this talk about wisdom and compassion is starting to feel a bit abstract. Can you bring it down to earth a bit? How do these teachings actually show up in the lives of everyday people?
That's a great question. And I think the sutra addresses it beautifully through its stories. It's filled with tales of individuals transforming their lives through these teachings, regardless of their background or circumstances.
So it's like a Buddhism for beginners guide, except way more profound and inspiring.
You could say that the sutra uses relatable stories to demonstrate the universal applicability of these teachings.
That's not just for monks or scholars, it's for everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. It shows us that these teachings are not just theoretical concepts, they're tools for living a more awakened and fulfilling life.
Okay, I'm ready for a story. Let's hear how these teachings actually play out in someone's life.
Okay, there's one story about a king who, despite his wealth and power, was deeply unhappy.
A king? Unhappy? That's hard to imagine.
Right, you'd think he'd have it all. But the sutra describes how he felt empty and unfulfilled. Despite having everything he could ever want materially, he still felt something was missing.
Okay, so we've got a king who's got it all, but he's still miserable.
Mm,
That's something I think a lot of people can relate to. It's that feeling of never enough, always wanting more.
exactly. It's a universal human experience.
So what happened to this unhappy king? Did he suddenly renounce all his wealth and power and become a monk?
Not quite. The sutra describes how this king, through a series of fortunate encounters, came across the teachings of Manjushri. He was particularly drawn to the concept of generosity.
Generosity. But wasn't he a king? Kings aren't exactly known for their generosity.
Well, that's the point. These teachings have the power to transform even the most ingrained habits and tendencies. The sutra explains how the king, inspired by Manjushri's example, decided to start practicing generosity in small ways.
So he didn't have to give up his entire kingdom.
No, he started by offering food and clothing to the poor, and gradually expanded his practice to include acts of kindness and compassion toward everyone he encountered.
Okay, so he started small, with manageable steps.
Yeah.
That seems a lot less daunting than, selling all your possessions and becoming a wandering monk.
Exactly. And that's what makes these teachings so practical. It's not about striving for some unattainable ideal. It's about making small, incremental changes in our daily lives.
That's encouraging. But I'm curious, did this shift towards generosity actually make the king happier?
The sutra describes how, as the king continued to practice generosity, his heart began to open. He experienced a profound sense of joy and fulfillment that had nothing to do with his material wealth.
So he basically traded material wealth for genuine happiness.
In a way, yes. He realized that true happiness comes not from accumulating possessions, but from giving freely and connecting with others.
That's a pretty powerful message.
It is, and it speaks to a core principle in Mahayana Buddhism, the idea that our own happiness is interconnected with the happiness of others.
So it's not about sacrificing our own happiness for the sake of others. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from cultivating a sense of shared well-being.
Exactly, and I think that's a message that's particularly relevant today. In a world that often feels very divided and individualistic, this idea of interconnectedness offers a powerful antidote.
I agree. It's like saying we're all in this together, and by working towards the happiness of others, we ultimately contribute to our own happiness as well.
Precisely. And the king's story is just one example of how these teachings can play out in our lives. The sutra is full of stories about people overcoming anger, jealousy, and fear through the practice of generosity, compassion, and wisdom.
Okay, so we've got these amazing stories illustrating the power of these teachings, but the sutra itself doesn't just rely on storytelling, right? We talked earlier about visualization and mantra recitation, but are there any other practices that might help us cultivate these qualities of wisdom and compassion?
Absolutely. The sutra places a strong emphasis on the practice of meditation, specifically a form of meditation known as shamatha vipassana.
Shamatha Vipassana. That's
Yeah.
quite a mouthful. What exactly does that involve? Is it like those guided meditations you find on apps these days?
It's similar in that it involves training the mind to be present and aware. But shamatha vipassana goes a bit deeper.
Deeper.
Yes, shamatha focuses on developing concentration, calming the mind, and overcoming distractions. Vipassana builds on that foundation, cultivating insight into the true nature of reality.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
First, you calm the mind, then you use that clarity to gain deeper understanding.
Precisely. And the sutra emphasizes that this practice is essential for developing wisdom and compassion.
But why? How does simply sitting and meditating lead to wisdom and compassion?
It's through meditation that we begin to see the interconnectedness of all things.
The interconnectedness.
Yes. We start to see how our own actions and thoughts impact others and how everything is ultimately interconnected.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be honest, meditation can be a tough practice. I've tried it a few times, and my mind always seems to wander off to my to-do list or what I'm having for dinner. Does the sutra offer any tips for those of us who struggle with meditation?
The sutra acknowledges that distractions are inevitable, even for experienced practitioners. It encourages us to approach meditation with patience and kindness.
Patience and kindness, even when our minds are doing the mental equivalent of a tap dance.
Exactly. It's not about beating ourselves up when our minds wander. It's about gently guiding our attention back to the present moment.
Okay, that seems a lot more doable.
Yeah.
But do you really have to sit on a cushion for hours on end to reap the benefits of meditation?
Not necessarily. The sutra suggests that by cultivating mindfulness throughout the day, even outside of formal meditation practice, we can gradually strengthen our ability to be present and aware.
So it's not just about those 20 minutes you spend sitting on a cushion. It's about bringing that mindfulness into everything you do.
Yes. Whether you're washing dishes, walking the dog, or even stuck in traffic, you can practice bringing your attention to the present moment.
Okay, so meditation is key for cultivating wisdom and compassion. But I'm wondering, does the sutra offer any specific guidance on how to cultivate compassion? Because, meditating on a cushion is one thing, but actually putting compassion into action in the real world can be a whole other challenge.
You're absolutely right. And the sutra addresses this beautifully through the concept of the bodhisattva ideal.
The bodhisattva ideal. That's a term I've heard before, but I'm not sure I fully understand it. Could you break it down for us?
In Mahayana Buddhism, a bodhisattva is someone who has dedicated themselves to achieving enlightenment for the benefit of all beings.
All beings.
Yeah.
So not just themselves.
Exactly. They embody the qualities of compassion, wisdom, and skillful action, working tirelessly to alleviate suffering and bring about awakening for everyone.
So it's like being a spiritual superhero.
In a way, yes. But it's not about having superpowers. It's about cultivating a deep sense of compassion and a willingness to act on that compassion.
And the sutra portrays Manjushri as bodhisattva, right?
He's the ultimate bodhisattva, using his 1,000 arms to reach out and help all beings in countless ways. He embodies this ideal of selfless service, of dedicating oneself to the well-being of others.
Okay, so by meditating on Manjushri, by invoking his qualities, we're also inviting that bodhisattva ideal into our own lives.
Precisely. We're aligning ourselves with that aspiration to benefit all beings.
But how do we actually DO that? I mean, short of sprouting 1,000 arms myself, how can I embody that bodhisattva ideal in my everyday life?
That's a great question. And the sutra suggests that this aspiration isn't some lofty, unattainable goal, but something we can cultivate through small acts of kindness, generosity, and compassion.
So it's not about grand gestures. It's about those little everyday moments where we have the opportunity to choose compassion over indifference.
Exactly. It's about making a conscious effort to bring those qualities into every interaction, every decision, every moment of our lives.
Okay, that makes it seem a lot less daunting. It's not about becoming some superhero bodhisattva overnight. It's about integrating those qualities into our everyday actions.
Exactly. And the sutra offers a framework for doing just that. Remember the story of King Notra, who established a 100-day practice throughout his kingdom.
Yeah, we talked about how that story highlights the power of collective practice.
Right. But it also points to the importance of creating supportive environments for cultivating these qualities. King Notra didn't just meditate in isolation. He created a culture of practice, encouraging his entire kingdom to participate.
So it's about recognizing that our environment plays a huge role in our spiritual development.
Absolutely. We're more likely to cultivate wisdom and compassion if we surround ourselves with people who share those values.
So find your tribe, so to speak.
Exactly. And the sutra suggests that by creating these supportive environments, whether it's within our families, communities, or even workplaces, We can make it easier for everyone to thrive on the path.
Okay, I'm really liking this idea of shifting the focus from individual effort to collective transformation.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, does the sutra actually give us any practical tips for creating these supportive environments? Because, it's one thing to talk about collective practice, but actually putting it into action in the real world can be tricky.
You're right, it's not always easy, but the sutra emphasizes the importance of communication, understanding, and patience.
Those sound like good qualities to cultivate in any situation.
Absolutely. It encourages us to listen deeply to others, to be mindful of their needs and perspectives, and to approach conflicts with compassion and a willingness to find common ground.
So it's about bringing those qualities of mindfulness and compassion into our interactions with others, even when those interactions are challenging.
Exactly. And the sutra suggests that by cultivating these qualities within ourselves, we naturally create a more harmonious and supportive environment for everyone around us.
Okay, so we've talked about the bodhisattva ideal, the importance of supportive environments, and even gotten some practical tips for navigating difficult interactions. I'm starting to see how these seemingly abstract teachings can actually translate into real-world action.
Yeah.
But before we move on, is there anything else you'd like to highlight about this section of the sutra? Anything that might be particularly relevant for our listener today?
I think it's important to remember that cultivating wisdom and compassion is not a destination, but a journey.
It's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. There will be ups and downs, moments of clarity and moments of confusion. But the sutra encourages us to approach this journey with patience, kindness, and a sense of humor.
A sense of humor. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How does humor fit into all this?
Well, the sutra doesn't explicitly talk about humor, but I think it's implied. Yes. It's easy to get bogged down in the seriousness of spiritual practice, to strive for perfection and beat ourselves up when we fall short.
Oh yeah, I've been there. It's like, why can't I just be more enlightened already?
But the sutra, through its playful imagery and relatable stories, reminds us that it's okay to lighten up, to not take ourselves too seriously.
So it's about finding that balance between discipline and joy, effort and ease.
Exactly. And I think humor can be a powerful tool for navigating that balance. It allows us to step back from our own self-judgment and approach our practice with a more open and playful attitude.
That's a great point. It's like, hey, if even the Thousand-Armed Manjushri can crack a smile, maybe we can too.
Exactly. It's a reminder that enlightenment doesn't have to be all serious and somber. There's room for laughter and lightness on the path.
Okay, that's a message I think we could all use a little more of. So much of what we see in the media portrays Buddhism as this very austere, almost ascetic tradition. But the sutra seems to be saying that it doesn't have to be that way. There's room for joy, humor, and even a bit of playfulness on the path.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes these teachings so appealing. They offer a path to awakening that's both profound and accessible, challenging and joyful.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Profound, and joyful. It's a winning combination. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. I think we've given our listener plenty to chew on.
We have. But don't worry, we'll be back soon to explore even more of this amazing sutra.
I can't wait.
Welcome back, ready for more.
Absolutely. We left off talking about how these teachings are for everyone, not just, monks on mountaintops. You mentioned the sutra uses these vivid stories to make that point. Got another one for us.
I do. This one's about a merchant. Super successful, but also super greedy, always wanted more.
Okay, so the classic tale of never enough, huh?
Exactly. And despite all his success, he felt empty, unfulfilled. I think a lot of people today can relate to that feeling, right? Always chasing the next thing.
You're sure. It's like the modern day version of that merchant's greed. Always wanting the newest gadget, the bigger house,
Yeah.
You get the idea.
Right. It's that constant feeling of, if I just had this, then I'd be happy. But the sutra offers a different perspective.
So what happened to this merchant? Did he have some kind of epiphany?
He did. Through a series of lucky encounters, he stumbled upon the teachings of Manjushri. And one thing that really struck him was the concept of generosity.
Generosity. Wait, wasn't he like the poster child for greed?
He was. But that's the power of these teachings. They can transform even our most deeply ingrained habits. So the merchant, inspired by Manjushri, started practicing generosity.
Okay, so he didn't suddenly become a saint, right?
No, he started small, offering food and clothing to those in need, and gradually he expanded his practice acts of kindness and compassion towards everyone.
So baby steps, basically.
Exactly. It's not about making drastic changes overnight. It's about those small, consistent actions.
That's reassuring because I'm not sure I'm ready to give away all my possessions just yet.
And the sutra doesn't ask us to. It's about integrating these qualities into our everyday lives in ways that feel authentic and doable.
Okay, but did this shift towards generosity actually make the merchant any happier? I mean, he was still a merchant, right? Still working, still making deals.
He was. But as he continued to practice generosity, his heart began to open. He started to experience a joy and fulfillment that had nothing to do with his material wealth.
So he found true wealth in giving his wealth away.
You could say that. He realized that happiness wasn't about what he possessed, but about how he lived, how he connected with others.
That's a pretty radical idea, even today.
It is, and it speaks to a core Mahayana Buddhist principle. Our happiness is intertwined with the happiness of others.
So it's not about sacrificing our own happiness to make others happy. It's about understanding that those two things are actually connected.
Exactly. When we contribute to the well-being of others, we naturally create a more positive and joyful environment for ourselves as well.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. But I have to ask, does the sutra offer any practices specifically for cultivating compassion?
It does. Remember we talked about shamatha vipassana meditation?
Yeah, the two-pronged approach to calming the mind and gaining insight.
Right. Well, the sutra emphasizes that this practice isn't just about personal peace, it's also about cultivating a compassionate heart.
So how does that work? Does sitting on a cushion magically make you more compassionate?
Well, it's not magic, but it does create the conditions for compassion to arise.
Conditions.
Yes, when we practice shamatha, we calm the mind. We reduce those reactive, self-centered thoughts that often block compassion.
So it's like creating space in our minds for compassion to emerge.
Exactly. And then, through vipassana, we start to see the interconnectedness of all things.
Oh, right. We talked about that earlier. It's about seeing how we're all connected, how our actions impact others.
Right. And as we deepen that understanding, compassion naturally arises. We start to feel a sense of care and concern for others because we recognize their inherent worth and dignity.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But how do we take that compassion off the cushion, so to speak? How do we make it an active part of our lives?
That's where the bodhisattva ideal comes in.
Ah, the superhero bodhisattva.
Exactly. Remember we talked about how a bodhisattva is someone who's dedicated to the well-being of all beings?
Yeah, they're like the ultimate embodiment of compassion in action.
Right. And the sutra suggests that we can all cultivate that bodhisattva spirit within ourselves.
Wait, so we can all be bodhisattvas, even without the superpower?
Exactly. It's not about magical powers. It's about making a conscious choice to live a life that benefits others.
So it's about those small acts of kindness, generosity, and compassion that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It's about showing up for others, offering a helping hand, speaking up against injustice. It's about making a difference in whatever ways we can.
Okay, that seems a lot more doable. But I'm still curious about this idea of creating supportive environments. We talked about how King Nutra created a culture of practice in his kingdom. How can we do that in our own lives? Do we have to become kings or queens to make a difference?
Not at all. The sutra suggests that we can start by creating those supportive environments within our own circles.
Our circles.
Yeah. Our families, our communities, our workplaces. It's about creating spaces where these values of wisdom and compassion are nurtured and encouraged.
Okay, so it's about surrounding ourselves with people who share those values.
Exactly. But it's also about being mindful of how we communicate, how we interact with others. The sutra emphasizes the importance of listening deeply, understanding different perspectives, and approaching conflicts with a willingness to find common ground.
So it's about bringing those qualities of mindfulness and compassion into all our relationships.
Absolutely. And the sutra suggests that by doing so, we create a ripple effect.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah, like throwing a pebble into a pond. Our actions, however small they may seem, have the potential to create positive change that extends far beyond ourselves.
Okay, I like that analogy. It's a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, even in seemingly insignificant ways.
Exactly. And I think that's a really empowering message. It's not about waiting for someone else to create a better world. It's about taking responsibility for our own actions and their impact on others.
So it's about being the change we want to see in the world.
Exactly. And the sutra, through the image of the Thousand-Armed Manjushri, offers a powerful vision of what that change might look like.
Okay, I'm getting a much clearer picture now. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, is there anything else you'd like to highlight about this section of the sutra?
I think it's important to remember that cultivating wisdom and compassion is not about achieving some kind of perfect state. It's an ongoing journey full of ups and downs.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about being present.
Exactly. And the sutra encourages us to approach this journey with patience, kindness, and a sense of humor.
A sense of humor. Okay, now you've really got my attention.
I know, right?
Hey.
It's not something we usually associate with spiritual practice, but the sutra reminds us that it's okay to laugh, to enjoy the journey.
So we can take our practice seriously without taking ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between effort and ease, discipline and joy.
And maybe even cracking a smile while we're at it.
Exactly. After all, even the Thousand-Armed Manjushri probably appreciates a good joke now and then.
Okay, that's a great image to keep in mind. Well, I think we've given our listener plenty to contemplate. Ready to move on to the final part of this deep dive?
I am.
Okay, back for the final stretch of our Manjushri deep dive. I gotta say, this sutra is really blowing my mind. It's like all these centuries later, it's still speaking directly to us,
I know, right? It's incredible how relevant these teachings feel, even today.
Totally. We've covered so much ground, the bodhisattva ideal, wisdom, compassion, the whole shebang. But there's one thing we haven't really talked about. Those 1,000 bowls. We've unpacked the 1,000 arms, the helping all beings thing. But what about the bowls themselves? What's the significance there?
Yes, the bowls. They're not just there for decoration.
I figured as much. So spill the beans. What are those bowls all about?
Well, remember how we talked about each bowl representing the abundance of wisdom and compassion Manjushri offers? It's like he's saying, here's all this wisdom and compassion, take it, use it.
Right, I remember. But what does that mean for us? I mean, we're not Manjushri. We don't have 1,000 arms, let alone 1,000 bowls. So what are WE supposed to do with all this abundance?
That's where things get really interesting. The sutra is inviting us to consider what WE fill our bowls with.
Our own end bowls. So it's not just about receiving Manjushri's wisdom. It's about cultivating our own wisdom and compassion.
Exactly. Each of us has unique gifts, talents, insights, things we can cultivate and offer to the world. It's like we each have our own set of bowls just waiting to be filled.
Okay, I like where this is going. So it's not about being a carbon copy of Manjushri. It's about finding our own unique way to contribute.
Precisely. The sutra is celebrating diversity, encouraging us to embrace our individuality and share it with the world.
That's a message I can get behind. But what if my bowl feels empty? What if I'm not sure what I have to offer?
That's a common feeling. But the sutra offers a solution: self-reflection. Take some time to look inward, explore your heart and mind. What are you passionate about? What brings you joy? What makes you feel truly alive?
Okay, so it's about paying attention to those inner sparks, those things that light us up from the inside out.
Exactly. Those sparks are often clues to our unique gifts and talents, the things we're meant to share with the world.
So it's not about having some grand preordained purpose. It's about following those little nudges of inspiration.
You got it. And as we explore those passions, we naturally start to fill our bowls with authentic and meaningful offerings.
Okay, that takes a lot of pressure off. I don't have to have it all figured out right now. I can just experiment, explore, and see what unfolds.
Exactly. The journey itself is part of the practice. It's about trusting the process and allowing ourselves to be guided by those inner sparks.
I like that. It's a much more gentle approach. So we fill our bowls with our unique gifts, but then what? Do we just keep them to ourselves?
Not at all. The sutra reminds us to offer those gifts freely, share them with the world without expecting anything in return.
So no strings attached.
Exactly. Just like Manjushri offers his wisdom and compassion without discrimination, we're encouraged to do the same. It's about giving from a place of abundance, not scarcity.
Okay, that makes sense. But I think our listener might be wondering, how do we actually do that? I mean, it's one thing to talk about offering our gifts freely, but how do we actually put that into practice?
Well, it starts with recognizing the value of what we have to offer, even if it seems small or insignificant.
So no comparing our bowls to Manjushri's 1,000 bowls.
Exactly. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every spark of creativity we share contributes to the collective good.
I love that. It's like we're all weaving this tapestry of wisdom and compassion together, each thread unique and essential.
That's a beautiful image. And it reminds us that even the smallest contributions matter. We never know how our actions might inspire or uplift others.
Okay, so we've talked about filling our bowls and offering them freely. But is there anything else you'd like to highlight about the Thousand-Armed Manjushri? Anything that might help our listener connect with his symbolism on a deeper level?
One thing that stands out to me is Manjushri being depicted as a youthful prince. It's a reminder that wisdom and compassion aren't just for the old and wise. They're qualities we can cultivate at any age.
So it's never too late or too early to start on this path.
Never. We all have the potential to awaken, to embody these qualities, regardless of our age or life experience.
That's a powerful message. It's like saying, hey, you don't have to wait until you're old and gray to start making a difference. You can start right now exactly where you are.
Exactly. And I think that's a really hopeful and inspiring message. It reminds us that the path of wisdom and compassion is open to everyone, regardless of age, background, or circumstance.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into this amazing sutra, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with?
If you were to visualize yourself with 1,000 arms, what would you hold in each of your bowls? What unique gifts, talents, and insights are you ready to offer to the world?
Wow, that's a question to ponder. I think our listener will be chewing on that one for a while. Thanks for guiding us through this incredibly rich and inspiring sutra. It's been a truly transformative journey.
My pleasure. Remember, the path of wisdom is a lifelong adventure. Embrace the journey, fill your bowls, and share your gifts with the world.